Hello, reading room. How are you? This is Dr. Annette Feravich. That's right, doctor. And when I call it democide, I know what the hell I'm talking about. Come on. Nice book. Really, really well-written book and, always topical. I forgot to read the little excerpts there on each one of the 3 chapters that I read, the 3 people out of 60 that I'm reading about who changed the church. And so, yeah, it's been so interesting. This has been really interesting. I'm learning from sinners, saints, rogues, and heroes. November 5th, the classroom, day 268. Anything else? I don't think so. Let's get our bottoms started. What was that? You want to look at the flowers? Okay, real quick, because we're starting on time. Well, as in on time, half an hour late. So this is John Bunyan. I'll read all 3 of the excerpts first. John Bunyan, gifted thinker, 1628 to 1688. And some said, let them live. Some, let them die. Some said, John print it. Others said, not so. Some said, it might do good. Others said, no. John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress, the author's apology for his book. We did read these. We as in me. Isaac Watts singing his songs, 1674 to 1748. Oh yeah, I started bawling at Joy to the World. I did. Not bawling. Nuts. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room, and heaven and nature sing. Isaac Watts, Joy to the World. And chapter 38, George Frederick Handel, Music to Make the Soul Soar, 1685 to 1759. Seems like it would have been appropriate for Isaac Watts as well, that title. I should be sorry if I only entertained them. I wished to make them better. George Frederick Handel, in response to a compliment from an audience member. Heard it. John Bunyan, gifted thinker, 1628 to 1688. And some said, let them live. Some, let them die. Some said, John printed. Others said, not so. Some said, it might do good. Others said, no. John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress, the author's apology for his book. The most famous and influential book in English is the Bible. The second is John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. What? The book was first released in 1676 and became so popular that nearly every house in his country had a copy. Wherever there was a Bible, it seemed, there was a copy of Pilgrim's Progress. Not bad for a tinker turned preacher, a convict turned author. Penniless. John Bunyan was born in November 1628 to a tinker's family. A tinker traveled from house to house fixing metal pots for a living. Thomas and Margaret Bunyan of Elstow, Bedfordshire, England, eked out a living this way for themselves and their children. As was done in those days, the son followed in the father's footsteps, and Bunyan became oh my gosh, hold on just a minute. I'm going to have to do the breakdown. Itinerate thinker. plying his trade the same way his father had, traveling from place to place, fixing pots and pans for those who could not afford new ones. During the English Civil War, he served in a parliamentary army before returning and taking up his father's trade. Around the age of 20, he married a woman as poor as he. She was an orphan with a dowry of just 2 books, Plain Man's Pathway to Heaven by Arthur Dent and Lewis Bailey's Practice of Piety, both Christian books. These books would play a role in his spiritual formation. The name of his wife is lost to us. We do know he had a blind daughter named Mary. Some speculate she might have shared the name with her mother. Bunyan was not a practicing Christian. In fact, he considered himself a great sinner, prone to swearing and disreputable behavior. His wife tried to reform him, but had little luck. Yet a spark of spirituality burned within him. 2 books, 3 poor women, 1 pastor equals conversation. So there's a plus. 2 books plus 3 poor women plus 1 pastor equals conversion. First conversation, then conversion. Bunyan behaved well enough to be considered a fine Christian by his neighbors, but he knew better. For though as yet I was nothing but a poor painted hypocrite, yet I loved to be talked of as one that was truly godly. The books that came as part of his wife's meager dowry had raised an interest in spiritual matters, but had still not instigated true change in him. But in his early 20s, Bunyan began attending a church in Bedford. The church was an independent congregation. There he encountered a pastor who taught the Bible with intensity, and soon Bunyan was poring over the holy book. Bunyan admitted that he was trying to work out his own righteousness, but failing. He was acquiring head knowledge, but had yet to connect to Christ in a personal way. While plying his tinker's trade in Bedford, he came where there were 3 or 4 poor women sitting at a door in the sun, talking about the things of God, and being now willing to hear their discourse, I drew near to hear what they said. Bunyan had become someone who talked religion, but did not understand faith. He listened to the impoverished women speak of God and faith and came to a moment of self-discovery. They were far above his understanding, out of reach. Their talk was about a new birth, the work of God in their hearts, as how they were convinced of their miserable state by nature. They talked how God had visited their souls with his love in the Lord Jesus. He would spend more time with people like this and gradually came to understand his soul's need. A third catalyst in Bunyan's path to faith came from John Gifford, the minister of the church in Bedford, who invited him to his home where he spoke to others about faith. Bunyan accepted the invitation and soon after joined the church, a rapid spiritual transformation began taking place. Within 4 years, he was drawing large crowds to hear his preaching. Bunyan now had head and heart in the church. I think that's a relative of Kathy Lee Gifford's husband. Yes, husband, yeah. Go to church or go to jail. For 2 decades, the separatists, those churches that chose to be apart from the Church of England, worked with little fear, but that changed suddenly. Charles II came to the throne and allowed the Clarendon Code to be reenacted. The code was designed to keep anyone who was not in fellowship with the Anglican Church from holding a political position. It also required adherence to the Anglican Church. Nonconformists like Bunyan were forbidden to preach. Later, it became illegal for a nonconformist minister to come within 5 miles of incorporated towns. I make marks in here and then do I do anything with them? No. Sometimes I do, but rarely. Clarendon Code. Those who did not comply with the code could be jailed. Bunyan chose the Bedford jail over submission to the code. It would be his home for 12 years. To be freed, all he had to do was promise to stop preaching. Bunyan couldn't do it. He would sit in jail until moss shall grow on mine eyebrows rather than thus to violate my faith and principles. I see the moss coming up here. Is that why you guys did that? Ha ha. No, seriously. Don't think I'm not getting messages all over the place. And I just don't know how, except for that they had to buy data. They're the only way I know how to make a physical connection to that. There's data already out there, and they've bought the data. Those who did not go, yeah. Did that sound like erasing data? Or rewinding data? Yeah, moss shall grow on mine eyebrows rather than thus to violate my faith and principles. His incarceration was not as brutal as some imagine. He was allowed visitors. He was allowed to go home from time to time, and on occasion he was even allowed to preach to crowds who gathered outside the prison. But these occasional liberties shouldn't take away from the sacrifice Bunyan made. While his family could visit him, the separation was grueling. See? You pieces of shit. You pieces of shit, thinking that you know so much. And you know you don't. And you know you don't, except for manipulation. Pride and manipulation. His incarceration made supporting his family nearly impossible, and the family had to rely on the kindness of others. Making this all the more poignant was the fact that Bunyan had 4 children. Concern for his family tormented him, yet he remained true to his cause, turning a jail cell into an office. Bunyan remained in jail for 12 years. During that time, he wrote 9 books. He was released, and that's what those motherfuckers want. This is what you want right here. That's why you put people in jail, why you create commotion, why you create chaos, and then you lock them away. You don't think I've known this? For how long? Write, produce, write, produce, write, produced. Capitalist bullshit, lazy fat asses. He was released from a time in 1666, but the authorities soon brought him back to his cell. From 1667 to 1672, he worked on Pilgrim's Progress, the timeless classic that would make him a household name and cement his legacy. You know what? Cement this. Well, I'm sure you already have. I saw the last picture over there. I know what it was. That's what it was. One of the greatest English classics was not written by some intellectual in a famous university, but rather by a creative genius in a jail cell who had, at best, a grammar school education. When not working on his writing, he served as prison chaplain to other inmates, made musical instruments from items in his cell, and wove shoelaces to help support his family. The Declaration of Religious Indulgence, issued in 1672, eased the restrictions on non-Anglicans. Bunyan was freed and accepted the post as pastor of the Bedford Church. Later, he was forced to return to prison again, but this time the stay was much shorter, 6 months. After his second release, Pilgrim's Progress went to press. The book became a bestseller and crossed the lines of social class. In 1 year, the book sold over 100,000 copies and today has never been out of print. And that's all they're looking for. Do you want a live story or do you want a dead story? Are you producing? Well, then you might have a live story. If you're not producing, you might have your last story be your dead story. Where are your fangs? Why aren't they constantly hanging out of your face? The funny thing is, I'm sure I've said that to my husband. You know, the one I just love dearly. Pilgrim's Progress. Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory, a story that carries additional meaning or a lesson. Bunyan wraps spiritual truths around his characters, the places they visit, and the people they meet. The protagonist is Christian, who represents the everyman on a journey from his city of destruction, the world, to celestial city, heaven. His journey is made difficult because of the great burden on his back. He seeks help along the way and receives it, but he also faces temptations and trials. The story parallels Bunyan's struggle with faith. He was not an instant conversion, but one that went through several steps and involved interaction with others. Like Christian, he felt the burden of his sin and wanted to be released of it and to be assured of entrance into a better world. Anyone familiar with the gospel message and the basics of Christian belief will see the meaning behind the story. Bunyan makes no effort to hide the truth in some clever way. The names of the characters, Christian, obstinate, pliable, companion, etc., and places they visit, Vanity Fair, House Beautiful, Wicket Gate, etc., are easy to recognize and illustrations of biblical concepts. Fame and faith. Pilgrim's Progress made Bunyan famous. Although none of his other books rose to similar acclaim, each was still well received on his own merit. Despite the change in his fortunes, Bunyan remained on the job as a pastor. He had spent 12 years in prison because he refused to give up his calling to preach, and he had no desire to surrender it now that he was free. That also parallels Johnny Cash's story, which I noticed when I read this before, which seems to parallel my dad's story. Oh, yeah. Bunyan may have been slow to come to faith, but once he arrived, he never left. He remained the pastor he had become, forged from his own pilgrim's journey. Out of his hardships came a book that opened many eyes to the challenges and benefits of the spiritual journey. His commitment to service may have cost him his life. In August 1688, the 59-year-old Bunyan, now nicknamed Bishop Bunyan, rode through a summer rainstorm in hopes of healing a rift between a father and son. He became ill soon after and died. Pilgrim's Progress has withstood changes in language, cultures, technology, social shifts, and more to become one of the most revered religious books written for the average person. It still touches lives today. Bunyan showed by deed and word how deep a commitment a person can make with his or her calling. Isaac Watts singing his song 1674 to 1748. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. And heaven and nature sing. Isaac Watts, Joy to the World. He wasn't much to look at, 5 feet tall, rail thin and pale, with a head that looked too large for his body. But oh, what was in that head? Isaac Watts was a multi-talented man, a prodigy in several fields, but he will always be remembered as the man who helped introduce hymns to the English church. Music is an integral part of the contemporary church. Regardless of denomination or church size, music was one of the first acts of worship and as much a part of the service as the sermon. This has not always been the case. In Isaac Watts' day, singing in church was uncommon. Old Testament psalms might be sung, but there was nothing contemporary about the music. Lutherans in Germany had been singing in church for decades, largely due to Martin Luther's love of music. He wrote many hymns. English churches, however, frowned on the practice. A prodigy. Watts was the first of 9 children in his family, born on July 17, 1674, in Southampton, England, to a father who spent a stretch or two in jail for not conforming to the Church of England. His mother told him tales of sitting on the jailhouse steps caring for her children. Watts was a child who learned quickly. He could truthfully be called a prodigy. He began learning Latin around the age of 4, Greek at 9, French at 11, and Hebrew at 13. He also had a gift for rhyme. As a teenager, he, like his father, shunned the Church of England, which meant he could not attend Oxford or Cambridge, even though there were friends and neighbors willing to pay his way. Instead, he went to a nonconformist academy in London. He spent the first years after his graduation as a tutor. In 1702, he became pastor of Mark Lane Independent Chapel in London. He had not been in the pulpit long before he developed an illness that plagued him the rest of his life. The nature of the illness is unknown, although he refers to jaundice and colic. The disorder lasted for years and took a toll on his body, mind, and emotions. Each year he had to pass more responsibility to his assistant pastor until Watts finally resigned. Sir Thomas Abney, mayor of London, took him into his home, and there he stayed for 36 years, remaining with the family even after Sir Thomas's death in 1721. Check his druggist. Something new for churches. Watts was disenchanted with the singing of psalms in church. The singing lacked enthusiasm and Christian content. It was biblical content, to be sure, but not Christian. The psalms were a beautiful representation of worship and praise, but were restricted to Old Testament revelation. Worshippers couldn't sing about the cross, the resurrection, the ascension, the Trinity, or the Nativity. Watts wanted to give worshippers an avenue to do that, but English churches had adopted a restraint of Calvin. Anything new was suspect. And this actually, I think, coincides with the Buddy Holly, The Day the Music Died. And I know that seems weird, but as we see themes that come and go because people don't learn, right? And we're praying that they do, so we don't have to continue this. I mean, if as a Buddhist you are sorry about this continuation of what you call life, what you need to do is learn your lesson. Stop with your lay or tease you. I find it abhorrent. Isaac Watts compiled hymns and spiritual songs, which he published in 1707. And oh, by the way, we were singing them in Catholic churches in 1977. In its pages, 1707, in its pages are familiar hymns such as Joy to the World, O God, Our Help in Ages Past, When I Survived the Wondrous Cross, and many more. He also wrote Psalms of David, imitated in the language of the New Testament, 1719, in which he transformed David's poetry as if the great king had written in Watts' time. He had a love for children and published the first hymnal for young people, Divine Songs for Children, in 1715. Some referred to his hymns as Watts' whims. While his songs made inroads with the independent churches in England, it wasn't until 1861, over a century later, that his work made it into a Church of England hymn book. Although he met resistance in England, his work was well received in America. Benjamin Franklin published Watts's paraphrases of David's Psalms. Revolutionary Americans loved the hymns. Fellow Englishman John Wesley used the words genius to describe Watts. How many hymns did Watts write? The exact number is still debated, but with confidence we can say that he wrote anywhere from 600 to 800 hymns over the course of his lifetime. A truly amazing accomplishment. Yeah, for sure. More than hymns, There was more to Watts than spiritual songs. He also penned 30 theological treatises, essays or philosophy, psychology, and astronomy, a textbook on logic, and 3 volumes of sermons. My gosh. Watts may not have been a physically imposing or dashing man, but his creativity, perseverance, and dedication to church music lives long after him. Modern hymnals still carry his hymns, and many worshipers could not imagine church without the occasional hymn from Isaac Watts. Chapter number 38, George Friedrich Handel, Music to Make the Soul Soar. I should be sorry if I only entertained them. I wished to make them better. George Friedrich Handel, in response to a compliment from an audience member. Every Christmas, the music of George Friedrich Handel fills concert halls and churches around the world. There is some irony in that. Handel never meant for his now famous Messiah to be associated with Christmas. He intended it for the Lenten season, the days preceding Easter. Still, over 270 years after it was written, the Messiah is still loved and performed around Christmas. It wasn't that way in the beginning. Against Dad's wishes. Born in the German town of Halle, Handel grew up with a mother who nurtured his love of music. But his surgeon barber father, who was in his 60s when Handel was born, forbid his son to study it. He had chosen law as the career his son would pursue. Music was just a distraction. Tradition, says Handel, would sneak into a room and play the clavichord, a keyboard instrument popular in the time, and it would be held here by your clavicle. I remember that vaguely, but more like an accordion than like a violin, no, it doesn't have the buttons. Never mind. Keyboard instrument, popular at the time. Yeah, so it was. Whenever his father was gone, Handel's father relented when his son turned 9, allowing the boy to take lessons in organ. His father died when Handel was 11. By the time he was 12, Handel was capable of substituting the church organist and had written his first musical composition. The future composer did take a stab at studying law, but soon abandoned it in favor of music. Handel continued his musical studies in Germany and Italy, then moved to England, where he would spend the rest of his life. Changing taste. Handel's first musical love was opera, but such large musical presentations had lost popularity in England. Handel began to lose money on his productions, yet stubbornly continued to write opera music. He often played to nearly empty halls, joking that the acoustics were better with fewer people in the seats. Finances were often, I used to joke that way too. Finances were often a problem for the maestro and became so severe he feared debtor's prison. Handel had to make adjustments. His humor was being tempered by financial need. In 1737, his opera company went bankrupt, and likely due to the stress this caused, he suffered a mild stroke. Handel then turned to writing oratorios. Unlike opera, with its costumes, drama, and acting, oratorios were less dramatic, had no costumes, and were usually based on biblical persons or events. One such oratorio, Esther, offended many church leaders who felt such sacred material shouldn't be performed in theaters. Still, Handel pressed on, and when the royal family attended, things turned around and the work obtained some success despite its opposition. Advertising posters for Israel and Egypt were torn down, and some people disrupted performances. All of this puzzled and angered Handel. After all, he was a Christian man, devout and well-versed in Scripture, better than most bishops according to him. He continued his work in the face of criticism, but financial problems continued to hamper his career. Down and depressed, despair was a familiar feeling for Handel. The roller coaster ride that was his life had left him depressed and broke. Financial problems and constant criticism by the English church and by detractors who called him the German nincompoop haunted him. In those dark days, his friend Charles Jennens came to visit. Jennens was a wealthy landlord and patron of the arts. He was also a librettist. It's got 2 T's in there. It actually has 3 T's, but 2 T's in the middle. A person who writes the topic for operas or librettos. A devout member of the Anglican Church, he had written a text he wanted to set to music. The material was taken directly from the Bible and meant to show God's work of redemption. Much of the material came from the Old Testament. He needed Handel to compose the music around the work. Over time, Jennens and Handel's would work on 5 oratorios, including the Messiahs. Seems like they have no problem putting naked people in their chapels. Handel received a second visit, this time from a charitable group wanting to use the oratorio to raise money to free men confined to debtors' prison. Handel would receive a commission for composing the work. The work consumed Handel, who locked himself away and worked night and day, scarcely eating. The production of the Messiah is the stuff of legend. He produced part 1 in 6 days, part 2 in 9, and part 3 in another 6. It took only 2 days to finish the orchestration. In those 24 days, he produced 260 pages of material. A traditional story has Handel saying to a servant after finishing the Hallelujah chorus, "I did think I did see all heaven before me and the great God himself." Messiah premiered on April 13, 1742 in Dublin, where it was well received and highly praised. Over 700 people attended. To make it possible to seat more, women were asked not to wear the hoops in the dress and men not to wear their swords. This allowed for the seating of about 100 additional people. Women stopped wearing hoops to concerts after this. The first performance raised enough money to free over 140 people from debtors' prison. It seemed as if Handel's fate had turned. It hadn't. London was a different matter. It took a year before Messiah would play in a major city, and when it did, it was panned by critics. To settle some of the controversy, Handel changed the title, which some thought was blasphemous, to a new sacred oratorio. King George II attended and stood at the singing of the Hallelujah chorus. Of course, when the king stands, everyone stands. Historians debate why he did this. Some suggest the king, who had hearing problems, thought the national anthem was being played. Others suggest he just needed to stretch his legs. Still others say it was a spiritual statement. Whatever the initial reason, audiences around the world have been standing during the chorus ever since. But it didn't take long before Handel was playing to empty houses again, and he was on the brink of poverty once more. He would conduct 30 performances, and only one of those was in a church, Bristol Cathedral. Handel faced health issues, including strokes. Later in life, he was hindered by cataracts. Despite surgeries to correct the problem, he eventually went blind. He died the day before Easter, April 14, 1759, and was buried in Westminster Abbey. The impact. Handel followed his musical dreams and experienced fame and disgrace. Still, his work continues to inspire. He was a man whose faith and art were inseparable. Although he also wrote secular work, it is his Bible-inspired composition that lives on after him, proving that art is a viable means of spiritual expression. There are those whose only exposure to the redemptive work of Christ is what they've heard in Messiah. Wow. Wow. There are those whose only exposure to the redemptive work of Christ is what they've heard in Messiah. Wow. George Friedrich Handel. When we come back tomorrow for the last of our 3 days on here in the classroom, I will be reading from chapters 39, 40, and 41. Chapter 39, Jonathan Edwards, The Quiet Man, 1703 to 1758. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times more abominable in his eyes than the most hateful venomous serpent is in ours. What the hell? The Quiet Man? I don't think so. Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God. We're going to ponder on that tomorrow for sure. Chapter 40, John Wesley, man standing on a tombstone, 1703 to 1791. I look at all the world as my parish. Thus far, I mean that in whatever part of it I am, I judge it meet, right, and my bounded duty to declare unto all that are willing to hear the glad tidings of salvation. John Wesley, journal entry, June 11th, 1739. Charles Wesley, the other Wesley, 1707 to 1788. I didn't make that up. That's in there. That's written right there. See? God buries his workmen, but carries on his work. That's not the promise, Charles Wesley. Charles Wesley, as quoted in Cyclopedia of Biblica, Theological and Ecclesiastical Literature. Okay, well, that certainly does give us something to ponder, especially that chapter 40, John Wesley. No. Jonathan Edwards, The Quiet Man. I think not. See, you want to place there is poison around. There is poison. If you sit over here and think, oh, she's in this encampment because of her poverty-stricken life, let me tell you something. They put you there through the system, and that has been the case throughout history. Look it up in my Bookless classroom, which is just before the reading room. We all have always had that. It hasn't always been just before the reading room, however. You can take a look at our schedule since we are on day 268 in the classroom. It is November 5th. And don't forget to be making up your thankful cards, right? I'm thankful for this reading room. Oh my gosh, I'm so thankful for this reading room. It has really, I read more books now because of this reading room than I have ever read before. Yeah, faux show. I mean, I always read textbooks, but once I read a textbook and I'm using a textbook, then it's really review and reviewing the notes and all those kinds of things. Dr. Annette Feravich, that's right, Professor. I know what I'm talking about. Don't give me this bullshit. We'll try next Monday and see what happens. Okay, Dr. Annette Feravich, are you making the connections between me in this classroom and me in the other classrooms? You need to be. Because all my classrooms work at the same thing, making our minds, our bodies, and our spirits healthier. Thanks for joining me.